Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to today's conversation on Gift of Healing TV. I'm Sara Jane. My co-host is Enolia. Enolia, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
And we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Shauli Mukherjee, who's actually in India. So we're all over the world today. Shauli, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today.
It's absolutely a pleasure to be here on this platform today. I'm just looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, so are we. Thank you. And our talking about conversation, our topic is, are we ready for a transformational era in education? So, Shauli, share a little, because you've been in education for 23 years now, and I've seen, congratulations, because you've achieved so much this summer and had that acknowledged. So, share a little about what you do and why this particular topic is just so important to you.
Yeah. Uh, so, as rightly said, that it has almost been 23 years for me that I have been associated with the sector of education. So, in this long journey, I have been the principal as well as the founder principal of some of the reputed schools in West Bengal, India, some of which had definitely been founded by me as the founder principal, set and established by me right from the very scratch. So, to name a few among them, I would definitely like to name Adamus World School and STEM World School. Now, why STEM World School? Because that happens to be the first STEM school in West Bengal, India, which was also eventually awarded for being the second best international day school in the entire West Bengal region of India by Education World in 2016. So, that also happens to be my brainchild. So after spending more than 2 decades in the field of school education and administration and leadership, in the year 2020, I had actually stepped into the domain of higher education, where currently I'm the director, School of Education, and associate dean of School of Liberal Arts and Cultural Studies at one of the premier universities of Eastern India named Adamus University. Additionally, I'm also associated with premier educational organizations across India, as well as globally in senior advisory positions and roles. And yes, as an inspirational speaker, I almost speak very, very frequently and regularly. Get invited to many universities, organizations, institutions, different forums to speak on the transformative power of education. So your question was why this particular topic, that are we ready for the transformational era in education, is so very close to my heart. Well, Sarah, I would just like to take you back to maybe 23 years when I stepped into the domain of teaching with a lot of dreams and aspirations in my mind to create a meaningful impact, to inspire people around me by the ennobling power of education. That is how my journey into the sector of education started. But yes, I must say that increasingly, day by day, I started becoming frustrated. I started becoming disillusioned and disheartened by the way in which education was delivered. I was more a part of the system where I witnessed that education was delivered in the model of one size fits all. So we have to understand that in the sphere of education, we are dealing primarily with individuals, human beings, children in that sense of the term, who are all born with unique blueprints. So we just cannot categorize them and put them in one box. We just cannot start teaching them the same thing in the same way and preferably on the same day. No, we can't do that. But that is exactly what education, I would say, that was how education was happening. And please don't get me wrong, this was not something that was happening in India. This is not something that was nation specific. This was a global issue, and this is still a global issue. Where we see that in the sphere of education, we speak highly about standardization, where everything boils down to two things, and one is conformity, and the other is compliance. But we forget the fact that education is an individual and customized and personalized activity meant for empowering the individuals. So that was something that was not happening. But at the same time, when I said that I was disillusioned and frustrated with the system, but that also gave me a lot of momentum and insight that maybe we have to do something differently. So it's one thing to be frustrated and not to do anything about it. And the other thing is to, you know, try to figure out as to how we can maybe, I'm not talking about repairing the system, because when it comes to education, repairing, refixing, tweaking will not help. The only thing that can help in the sphere of education is total revolution. And from my end, well, I can maybe contribute my own, uh, what I have learned and what I feel would bring a lot of difference into the system. That has actually, Sarah, led me to establish and set up the first STEM school in West Bengal, India, in the year 2015, which was a very, very different school, where the happiness and the passion quotient of the children were high, rather than focusing on the intelligence quotient.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we are all wired slightly differently. We learn differently. We learn at different speeds. And one of the things that has come to me fairly recently is about creativity. There seem, that there are art classes and needlework classes and woodwork classes, but it's very specific what you're learning in those, cookery classes, all sorts of things. And I don't have children, so I've been out of the school thing for a long time, but there seems to be a lack of children being allowed to think for themselves, encouraged to think, use their creativity in many, many different things. So I'm assuming that that's an aspect that you've looked into putting into what you're doing with children.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm so happy that you have, raised this issue. So you see, our entire educational system is actually revolving around one particular kind of quotient. People are going crazy about IQ, intelligence quotient, forgetting the fact that more than 80% of the success in your life, be it in your professional sphere or in your personal endeavors, it actually rests on your emotional quotient and not on your intelligence quotient. So, our education, the flaw in our educational system is we give too much of importance to IQ and we neglect EQ. So, there is absolutely no training on emotional intelligence for the children or even for the teachers, and that is scary.
Yeah.
I would say scary because when we realize the importance of emotional intelligence and emotional quotient, uh, you know, it being so much important for the success in our lives, success in all spheres, personal, professional. We see parents not being trained in emotional intelligence. We see teachers not being trained in emotional intelligence. Obviously, we cannot expect the children to understand emotional intelligence. So there is so much of focus in trying to teach the child the basics of maths and the basics of language while neglecting this very important domain that is emotional intelligence. See, we have to train our children, we have to teach them how to establish meaningful connections and meaningful relationships in life. That comes from emotional intelligence, right? Creativity is definitely a part of it. Obviously, the creative quotient is not given any importance. It all boils down to whether you are good at obeying instructions, whether you can fit into the mold, whether you can be categorized in one box, whether you can follow instructions. That's all. But that is not the purpose of education. When we speak about education in terms of character building, or in terms of moral behavior, in terms of spiritual empowerment, well, this is not how education should be delivered.
Enolia.
Yes, yes, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I've had the opportunity to speak on education a few times with different venues on how the United Nations looks at their SDGs. And one of the things that always occurred to me is that if we ever wanted to make a change in the world, it starts with the children. And it always amazed me that here we are as adults talking about these particular topics that are of great importance to us: humanity, education, wastewater treatment, environment, so on and so forth. Why aren't these taught at the fundamental level of education, period? Why do we have to talk about gender equality when we can implement gender equality right at the basis level of children, to teach children to look at each other and work with each other with mutual respect? Now, understanding that around the world we have different traditions all the way in every regard, there is still a basic fundamental humane way to treat one another. There is still a basic fundamental understanding that when you have trash everywhere, that it needs to that we need to treat the environment better. That you don't have to live with habits of people, and I see it every day. Here I am in Africa, eating something, taking the plastic and just tossing it. These are taught behaviors. And there's so many different ways in which we can build infrastructure. Creativity. We talk about agency and empowerment. I understand that, and I'm one of them, because I do personal development, especially with professionals, that we want to teach empowerment. But one of the things is that those who have never experienced being able to execute their own agency because of their circumstance cannot fundamentally understand what it is to feel empowered to make a decision, because they don't have that agency in their own home, let alone in a structured environment. So I look at all of these things and I want to know what your thoughts are in terms of implementing some of these fundamental pieces in a system, because we're great on institutions and systems, such that some of the things that we keep talking about over and over and over again can actually be implemented. Because to me, it doesn't start anywhere else except with the child. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would just like to add one thing here, and
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, see, uh, the expectation is that everything will start at the level of the school. Everything will happen in the educational institution. So when we speak about a child and his basic training and to whatever the child will be exposed to, we always tend to make a very big mistake in bringing the educational institution at the fore. Well, before that, if it comes to gender equality, if it, as you had been referring to, Nolia, I
Mm-hmm.
would like to say that it begins with the family. It does not start with the school. It does not start with the educational institution. Yes, school, educational institutions, colleges, universities, communities, workplaces, they will continue. They'll continue with it. But it all starts with your family. It can start with your mother, the day you are born. Why is a mother, so called educated in the true sense of the term, will wrap a child in either blue or pink, depending on the sex of the child, not gender, right? So this starts right on, day one. So even if you see that, if I have a daughter, and if my daughter has a birthday, the first thought that will come to my mind regarding the birthday gift is that I will be gifting her a doll to play with. And if it's a boy, I will be gifting him a toy car or a toy gun. Now, these are very important points of socialization, wherein the family is involved. So, aren't we giving this indirect and very strong messages to the children right from day one, either through parents or through grandparents or whatever, that this is how we expect you to behave? This is how you have to be a certain way, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to talk in a certain way, to dress in a certain way in order to be socially accepted. So all these starts right from the family. Even if you see, you know, the grandparents, they tell fairy tales to the grandchildren. So if you see the common thread in those fairy tales, it's always, uh, you know, mm, um, a fair-skinned princess. She is an epitome of goodness, but at the same time, she's so helpless. She's always waiting for the handsome prince to come and rescue her, right? So this is the common thread that runs. So what are we actually trying to tell our daughters? That, well, you are helpless unless there's a male person coming into your life and doing something in your life. So are we trying to give these kind of messages to our daughters? Do we want them to believe that if they are fair skinned, they will be considered as beautiful? So we have to be very, very, cautious and careful. Now, this is also education. I do not want to discriminate education uh, as to how it is being delivered in a family setup or how is it being delivered in an educational setup. Education is everywhere. It's a lifelong process. Everywhere it's education. So, as parents, as teachers, as educators, as responsible adults, we all have to be extremely careful about the kind of messages and signals that we are emitting.
I would totally agree with you. And one of the things that I think about, and I cannot speak for the schools in India, but I do think about the schools in the West. And I also observe the schools here. And at least in the schools in the West, our children spend approximately 8 to 10 hours with educators. And this is why a lot of the fundamental viewpoints, situations are introduced. They're introduced by the school. So from the time that my child is born until about 4 years old, they are with mom and dad and family. But from 4 years old, or even earlier than that, they are implemented in an institution because two parents are expected to work. So when you think about the time that a person takes to work, which is on average, at least in the West, 8 hours, and then not including if they have to work overtime, is 10 hours. And there's only 24 hours in a day. And then at least 8 hours of that time is spent resting. The education industry spends half, if not more time with our children than we do because of the way that our environment is set up. And I know that may not be that way in India, but it is in the West. So I just want to drive this home because I think that it's really important that we hold a balanced responsibility. If I'm teaching my child one thing at home and that imbued foundation is there, and then they're spending 8 hours a day hearing different messages other than what I brought to them from home, then it is important that we look at the institutions in alignment that are educating our children, and that balance has to take place. So I can't not hold the institution responsible. When I, with my two sons coming up, was working with the institutions, I used to meet with their teachers all of the time to make sure that we were in alignment. And I think that this is a message going out to parents also, that they have to play a role within their children's lives, knowing that the children are going to an educational institution longer than they're spending the time with their families and at home. And, you know, I'm not giving any definitive like, oh, the institution's this and oh, the parents are that. But what I'm saying is that there is a handshake there. There is a balance there. You cannot do one without the other, because the institution has our children and it's required by law to have our children. So the influence is great. And therefore, they need to work with parents in order to make sure that that handshake is taking place. So I just kind of throw those thoughts out there, because as a person having raised two boys on the other side and working with institutions in the West in order to educate and still want my children to be productive citizens, aligned and able to function in the world, it's important. It's an important relationship that has to take place. Your thoughts, Sarah?
Seriously thinking about this, as you said, the children are with you 1 to 4, 1 to 5, whatever the ages the children go to school. And the children learn so much. They learn how to speak, how to walk in those first 4 or 5 years. And they learn by copying what is going on in the family home. They copy. It doesn't matter if a parent says to a child, don't do that. If they're watching their parent do it, it's a learned behavior. So it is, you know, maybe there's about more education of adults, because you talked about, you know, somebody walking down the street, taking a bite of something and just chucking the wrapper down. I literally saw a short video on, I think it was LinkedIn, yesterday, the day before, and it was a video about this exact same thing: children copying the adult in their life. And the first one was, okay, a parent walking across a square on a mobile phone with the child behind pretending to be on a mobile phone. But it even got to the extent of a boy witnessing his father going to hit his mother. And that's how you end up with wife beaters. It's a copy. What you've witnessed in the home is how you perceive family life to be. Schools, absolutely, schools are there to support the family life and hopefully bring children around from those experiences that they've experienced in their own home, their family life. You know, a parent that is constantly shouting at the child or at the other adult in the home, they live in that type of environment. And it's really important that the schools can support the children to know that that actually isn't right, but that should come from the home. But is that not a learned behavior from the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents? Is that not just that generational thing that a child witnesses what happens at home and believes that is how family life should be? What if they witness their parents chucking stuff on the ground? That's a learned behavior. And schools are important. They really are. They can support children, not just with the education of learning about the world, but of learning about actually there is another way of being, that respect for each other, that courtesy for each other. But it is also about the child themselves, learning that they are better than some of those things they may witness out there. The games that they play on computers, and some of those are war type games. You can go around and you can kill people and hurt people. And seriously, what is out there? Our news is so negative. That's why I haven't listened to it for years. What's going on within the family can be compounded by the schools, or the schools can try and really support the children. But the family has way more of an effect on what is going on. Yes, absolutely. What you did with your son speaking to the teachers on a regular basis. But if you're coming from a way of being that may have just turned around and said, that sort of energy stops with me, because there are a lot of people doing that today. That energy stops with me. That is not going to happen in my family home. But there are still an awful lot of people who are in that learned behavior. And in schools, yes, it's very difficult. Schools are not responsible for our child's upbringing. The families are, but the children, but the schools can not be held responsible, but schools can support the children with different learnings. So learning about the environment rather than necessarily geography in the way we are taught it today, history in the way we've been being taught it, all those things changing as the children get older, having more discussions and helping them to really think about things. So as the children get older, having discussions about how things should be in the family, relationships, sort of etc. You've got a racist parent, doesn't matter the color of your skin, you've got a racist parent. That child's going to learn from that. The schools can do their best, but the child is still going to take from the parents as the main caregiver. So I get what both of you are saying, and it's a frustrating sort of, whereas a clash, both are absolutely essential. Shauli.
Yes, Sarah, this is definitely a collective responsibility. And it is not about calculating the amount of time that a child spends in an educational institution or maybe in a family setup. So that's not important. That's just not important. What's important is the child spends time in both the setups. And the messages that the child picks up from both the setup is equally important. And there shouldn't be any conflict, there shouldn't be any clash between the two different kinds of messages that are coming to the child. There has to be a congruity, there has to be, a perfect alignment, I think. Otherwise, say a child's brain, it's bound to get confused. The child will not know. I'm not talking about what is right and what is wrong. I don't want to say that. But, we are equally responsible for the cultural socialization of the child, be it as parents or as educators or as teachers or as adults or whatever. We all are responsible for that. And also, along with all that we have to do, I think it's vitally important also to realize that the child has a unique blueprint. The child has his own unique abilities, talents, interests, passion. So we do not have any business to thrust onto the child that what we feel is right and what is our expectation. We can have a lot of expectations, okay, but then we do not have any business to thrust our expectations onto the child. We can't do that. We have to be good observers, I think. We have to be very good observers. We have to find out what is the knack of the child, wherein the child is interested, you know. And yes, we have the responsibility of maybe, productively channelizing the child into those domains where the child can really contribute meaningfully. There are definitely certain areas where the child needs our guidance and help, but not in every domain, please. We have a kind of an obsession to become helicopter parents, which we should not be. We have to realize at the end of the day that they are their own individual selves, and we have to give them enough space for them to evolve and grow into the kind of person that they are meant to be. They are not here to satisfy our fantasies. As parents, we all have our fantasies, right? That a child must be like this. My son has to be like this. Or my daughter has to go into this particular domain because my son, my daughter would be a kind of a trophy that I can display in front of the world. A very, very mistaken notion. How many of us parents can be good supporters of our children, trying to give them this kind of a message that we are always with you, no matter whatever you would like to do, we are there with you. We are a great support system. How many of us can just forget our own individual fantasies, our own agenda, our own expectations, and can just step back a little and can allow the child to mature into his own individual self? I think it's time for us to ponder on this. It's important. It's also education. You see, education will not come only from the kind of certifications and degrees that you get after you complete the formal education. Rather, being in this sphere for so many years, I keep on telling even the teacher educators and the would-be teachers that the day you get your formal certificates and degrees, that is the day when your education and your life starts, actually. So a lot of revisiting, a lot of maybe reimagining education in the true sense of the term is needed.
For me, it's about supporting the child to find what are their strengths, what's their joy, what's their passion, what speaks to them. Because when they find that, they are going to be willing to learn. They are going to want to learn. And that, for me, is what education should be about, is helping them to get to that stage in their life where, yes, they've learned some of the basics. You've got to learn to read and write, do some basic maths so that you can actually move forward to hopefully live your passion, to learn about it, and try the different things along the way, because we all grow as we move through things. So yes, there are the aspects of being able to learn to cook so that you can cook for yourself and care for yourself. The basic things are, they should come from home and they should come from school. Treating each other. At the end of the day, for me, children wish to be listened to and heard. And if we can give them that in school and in home, we start to empower them. Enolia.
I love the fact that that you've created models of schools with the direction that you share. I think that those children are very much blessed. I recently gave a speech just a couple of months ago to 500 high school students in Nepal. And the title of that speech was "You Are the Gift." And what you do and what you have is the gift, no matter how small or how grand it is. And that no matter what your circumstance is, that what your gift is the contribution to the world. And to hear that an institution can actually capture that and nurture that is phenomenal. I believe that, at least my experience with the West, they have a long way to go. I believe that There's a fundamental piece missing with parents. See, nobody teaches you to be a good parent. You only do the best that you can from the circumstance that you can. So there are those individuals, working with personal development, I've actually seen it's just like, okay, I have this child, it's my first child, I don't know what to do. What do I do? How do I do it? And it's almost like maybe that's something to actually explore, is parenting 101 for those people who are brand new parents who never have parented before. Because we take for granted that certain skills or certain behaviors are there just out of the fact that as human beings we love, but not everybody knows how to love. And so not everybody knows how to nurture. Here I am in Angola, and I remember traveling and coming from Calendula Falls to Luanda, which is a 6-hour journey. And I was the only woman in this particular bus that was taking us from one location to the other. And I was speaking with 16 Angolan men. And we went there having this conversation saying, and me arguing with them, basically a gentleman says, like, I put food in her mouth, I put roof over her head and clothing on her back. Isn't that love? And I looked and I was like, no, that's taken care of. But in their minds, that behavior, that act was showing the love. And they shared with me the most important thing to them in the world was their children. And so my question back was, well, if your children are the most important thing to you, why wouldn't you want them to grow up in a nurturing, loving relationship by valuing your partner? And so I think that there is a cycle to break. So I think part of that cycle is to break it from what the children encounter outside of this is the standardized way that they were brought up in home, and that's what they perceive, and whether it's functional or dysfunctional. And then I also think that there's a component where adults have always followed, sometimes based on traditions, values, limited belief systems, whatever the case may be, to expand their role because they had never had a conversation like we had in that cab ride of a different point of view that basically said, well, and I'll end it with this. My question back to them was, okay, you feel this way. What will you do? And they asked me, well, what do you mean, what will I do? I said, you become the next elder. Are you going to perpetuate this? If you didn't like it, if you didn't like your circumstance, if you didn't like how you were treated, if you didn't like, the fact that some married for love, some didn't marry for love, that they were just handed this responsibility and had to grow up. If you don't like that, what will you do to change it? And that question had never entered their mind. So I would say that there's an education process, yes, that needs to take place with adults. And then, the fact that children grow up and be productive citizens in certain circumstances is amazing.
Yeah.
And that any institution or any circumstance that allows them to realize that they are supported and that they are the gift is one to cherish and one to model. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Enolia, because we are coming close to sort of end of time. So, Shauli, before we finish, is there anything else you would like to add before we close? And I'll share your how people can connect with you as well in the chat bar.
I would just like to share that it had been a wonderful experience being on this platform today and interacting with both of you. And I couldn't agree more with what Enolia said right now about parenting, because this is something that we take for granted, right? So your biological capability of, giving birth to a child is not equivalent to your nurturing ability. So I believe, and this is a question which I always have in my mind, for which I never receive any answer. We all know that, of course, there is no degree certifications given to a parent after you become one. No directions, no guidelines. I mean, you get a lot of informal, guidelines and things like that from people around you, but there is no sort of formalized, organized kind of a training mechanism for the parents, for the new parents. But they don't we all know something that can't be, we all can relate to what Enolia said right now, that when a person becomes a parent for the very first time, isn't it very natural for that particular person to be extremely confused and to seek help and not to know things, how to do things? I mean, it's something very, very natural. It is so unnatural that everybody around you expects the day you become a mother or a parent, magically you will be having all the knowledge of doing things right. So, this is a question which even I also have in my mind, and because when you are in charge of your children, such an important task given to you, how can you just leave that to chance? Can we do that when we are selecting schools for our children? We spend more than a year to find out the best educational institution for our children. We spend so much of energy and time to find out the right kind of a caregiver for our children. We spend our entire lifetime selecting the proper and right so-called career options for our children. We do so many things, right? We never leave anything to chance when it comes to our children. Then how can we leave this particular thing to chance? That the most important people in the child's life, they will just learn, and I mean, we expect them to learn, and we expect them to have all the knowledge and know-hows of parenting. How can we leave this particular thing to chance? Well, I don't have any answer for this.
Shauli, thank you so much. Enolia, you want to close and let us know about the fortnight's time?
Yes, yes, yes. First of all, thank you for such a powerful conversation because, we all come from different experiences and we all come from different means and understandings of what education should feel like, look like, be like, um, um, assist us in every respect. But the beauty about this is that educators like yourself are still working on it, working on that change. And it's absolutely essential that it continue. Your job is probably the hardest. It is one of the hardest things because it impacts people at multiple levels, at every level. And it's essential because you're cultivating and helping that next leader of the next future generations come forward. And if our institutions stand still, that's a problem. That's a problem. So please keep doing what you're doing in creating dynamic environments, holding space for children to be creative, to be the gift, to be able to pursue STEM subjects, no matter what gender they are, and bring us the leadership that we need. Because we need it. We need it. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about our next show, which will be December 14th. And we are going to be speaking with Deborah Crawley. And Deborah Crawley's topic is serving the elderly. Serving the elderly and how we work with our elders. So I am excited to see her there. That show will take place at 7:30 p.m. UK. And we always do this, right, Sara Jane? And 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8:30 p.m. Angola time. So we welcome you for the next today's conversation with Deborah Crawley, Serving the Elderly. And this has been a great show. Sara Jane?
Thank you, Shauli. Thank you, Enolia, for such a powerful conversation today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It was really a nice experience interacting with both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, folks. Take care. See you again
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.